Thank you so much for being here today. We will get you to lunch on time, I promise. I'm going to start with you. It's not a softball because you're going to answer it honestly. It's going to sound like a softball. Why Abu Dhabi and why now for you?
Well, look, the issue that we are still facing in Europe is the perception of the region here. A lot of people still think that a lot of investment that is being made in this region is about oil. It's about energy, it's about fuel. And we have experienced that it's vastly different than that. We've been here with some of our network around a year ago, and we have spoken to Emirati who have explained to us how important nature is to them, how important the sea is to them, and how important sustainability is to them, because it's connected to that. Because there has been this story of basically going, look, it's already tough in the summers when it's 50 degrees. When it goes towards 60 and it's not going to get much colder in the winter, this space might be unlivable. So we have to change something in order to avoid this. And it's important for us because we have some companies in our portfolio that most likely in the future will also be active in the region here. And so for us, it's important for our investors to understand that this is a region that has impact and sustainability at heart, because it's important for the people that live here to actually be able to live here 10, 15, 20 years from now. Mm-hmm. And that's why here, and that's why now.
It's existential.
Yeah.
Yeah. Solveig, thanks for being here as well. You're an education expert who has consulted with government. You've been in the Gulf for the last 15 years. And you work to understand human capital and how to best kind of future-proof, be prepared for the future. You have said if capital can be patient for carbon neutrality by 2050, it can be patient for literacy and leadership by 2040. Can you unpack what that means?
Sure, certainly. But if I may, I want to extend one thing. Why UAE? Why now? Because the UAE is a remarkably unique environment. It is wildly diverse. It is growing rapidly. It is innovative. It is looking to do new things. And it is small enough to be a sandbox at a national scale. And so I think...
Pardon the pun? No.
Yeah. And so it really is an opportunity that larger economies don't have. American, obviously, you can't just implement something nationally in the US and see how it goes. You can do pilots here, like micro pilots on a small scale, and then national pilots to see how it goes, and you can see how it impacts multiple cultures. You can see how it impacts multiple industries. But you've got, by definition of most of the people here, the mindset and the innovation who want to be here. Now, having said that, to your actual question about education, and I have to thank all of the panelists prior to me, because it was like a great big lead up to calm down. Like the problem we face in the education sector is speed. If I hear one more person say, we want quick wins, 6 months in education, I'm like, go away. This is a longitudinal approach to, that Tim, when he introduced, I'm going to quote several of the panelists, talked about the UAE was built in a generation. That's true, and that is an incredible accomplishment, but it took a generation. This is not a quick win situation. Education, I struggle for events like this because we are an educated, articulate, engaged group of people who do a lot of research, a lot of learning. We don't represent the masses by any stretch of the imagination. And we are in a position right now where every single one of your investments is at risk. Every single one of scalable because of the quality of the human capital available to scale it. And so, but that is also not a quick overnight fix. And I'll talk about the infrastructure and the rest, but it really is about setting the context. I want to thank Dr. Othmar because he said the most quotable thing, and all of you are going to end up in my ongoing presentation, so thank you. I will give you credit. I will tag you, but that capital should be in support of people, prosperity, and peace. And my argument and basic premise is that with the education infrastructure we now have, all three of those things are at risk, and therefore your investments by extension.
And education here in the UAE and the Gulf more broadly has to do a heavy lift. The UAE is undergoing a massive transformation to transition into becoming a service-based economy, a knowledge-based economy. I would imagine that's kept you compelled for the last 15 years.
Oh,
I would imagine that's what's not sent you back to New Jersey
That's why I am still here.
Can you talk a little bit about that transition to a knowledge-based economy and sort of, for people who are just visiting here, what is actually the context here in the Gulf for what you do for future-proofing?
Well, and this, I'm going to quote Costas. He just said a moment ago, you have to build a great, he was talking about cars, but X. You have to build a great educational infrastructure. Now, that means that is not a generic, that is a wild oversimplification. You have to subset these by who, I've worked a lot in workforce development. Contextualized to your question here in the region, specifically the UAE, there's an enormous drive to to grow the private sector, to move away from extraction economies and their subsidiaries into a much more diversified economy. If you look at the employment in those industries, you have, and these are rough figures, but they're very, very indicatively correct. In the private sector, 95+% of the private sector is expat, and the public sector is 95, 98% local, popular Emirati. There's cultural reasons for that, there's educational reasons for that, there's historical reasons for that. But so my primary focus historically has been on workforce development, to be able to create both a more efficient government infrastructure, policy generation, to support and grow the private sector, and transition to the private sector. And that is a very, very heavy lift, because what needs to be built to do that is a great X. And X in this case is in education. Now, that can be unpackaged into K through 12, university, and workforce development, and they're all very different conversations to be had. But in what drives me nuts and what keeps me busy in this market is building the great X is not building a great university that looks like what we run in Europe or North America. The Western model has long since not been fit for purpose. And yet, the market here wants to continue to replicate that. So to your point about why the UAE right now, with capital and courage, we really should and could focus on building very different models that are more fit for the purpose of what investors need, what markets need. And everyone is running around right now very panicked. I will stop. I know. Go on. About AI and the changes that is bringing, and that's all true. But unless you are one of the doomsday sayers who thinks AI is going to make humanity obsolete, what we have to do is upskill humanity to be relevant as those market changes are coming with that technology.
I like the phrase courage and capital, and I think it connects to you. You seem courageous and capitalistic. Let's talk about, Deanne, and how you think about structuring capital. So Abu Dhabi sovereign wealth funds often describe themselves as patient capital. And I wonder, does that resonate with you at all? How does Deanne kind of structure its capital? How do you think about horizons and impact?
Yeah. Well, look, first of all, we're a publicly listed company, so basically everyone can invest into us, and my job at the end of the day is to make money for everyone that is invested in us. Nevertheless, as we also fund our portfolio expansion through debt vehicles, we look at investments usually with a time horizon of 2.5 to 4 years. That's kind of our sweet spot, kind of in which we operate. Of course, it depends on the stage in which we enter a business. So if we're going in at a later stage, it might be quicker. We also had examples where it was only a year, but it's basically just a flip, so to speak, from our side, which are more than welcome because it kind of gives me quick money, so to speak, that I can then work with on another end. But generally speaking, I think we need to give the businesses some time, because even though we evaluate them and kind of come to the conclusion that they are already having a positive impact, but there's always room for improvement, and that improvement increases the value of the business, which in turn generates a larger return for my investors. So it's kind of a win-win situation. So I have time to develop the business and also develop it to a stage where it's more valuable, where then can, well, first of all, easier exit it, because it becomes more interesting for other investors, and also exit at a higher price.
I'm really interested in the idea that you've gone public and you found success in the capital markets given impact investing, just the nature of it and returns. Can you talk about capital markets? Are they fit for purpose for what you're doing? How have you made it work? How have you gotten the math to math?
Well, yes and no, so to speak, because at the end of the day, I think the good thing that comes with capital markets is the need for transparency. And that helps when you want to operate in the impact space. So for us, for example, when we wanted to issue our second bond now, let's say, and we didn't even want to do a green bond, but still, like from the name that we had, German sustainability, basically the authorities said, look, you have to prove to us that your investments are sustainable. And I think that's a good thing, because if it wouldn't be a product that is listed on the capital market, and if we wouldn't be listed on the capital market, no one would have really cared about this. But this way we can show our investors very transparently and very clearly that the businesses that we invest in are sustainable, have a positive impact. And I think that is something that we need to do more of, be more transparent on that front and show why is it a good investment, why is it a positive impact investment, why is it a sustainable investment. And I think that is kind of where the capital market helps. There are hurdles where it doesn't really help, let's say, because then you have to, like, we are still small enough, so to speak, that we do not have to adhere to each and every kind of measure that there is in order to limit or to guide, let's say, publicly listed companies. So for us at the moment, it's actually a quite positive instance that it's the case. But I think once you reach a certain size and a certain complexity in a business, which we don't really have because we're just a holding structure. So basically the businesses that we are invested in would run into that issue. When you're more an operating company, then it becomes a bit more difficult, in my opinion. But for us, it's worked really well, and it helped us actually a lot in creating the transparency and the trust for the investors.
So you're beholden to share price in a way, right?
Yeah.
You're beholden to share price, we're beholden to GDP, we're beholden to all of these metrics. This is a clunky transition to Solveig to talk about metrics. I want to talk about how you, in education, when you're thinking about future-proofing, what are the metrics that you are held accountable? You've chosen to be held accountable to share price. What are the things that should be opted into when it comes to measuring success?
Well, I think there's two parts to that answer. The first part is the metrics we currently live and die by are part of the problem, because we talked about, good and bad bureaucracy and good and bad regulation, and the current education model is a monument to successful failure, in that it is without question the reason that society has evolved the way it has over the last 150, 200 years. It has changed, it has grown the middle class, it has pulled people out of poverty, it has allowed for growth in industry exponentially. The problem is the assumptions that go into it and the metrics we are using to measure it, which turn into rankings, which turn into, are now, the assumptions have changed. We talk about AI and technology, just a very simple example. Assessment methodology is all subject to disruption by AI. So there is no longer proof of mastery of skill almost possible in a classroom with the structures that we now have. One of the previous panelists talked about Khalifa University's commercialization of research. Wonderful initiative. And I do encourage all of you to listen to him. They're a great example of that and where great ideas are coming from. But the historical version of that is universities are ranked based on research publication. Research in the strictest, most academic sense. And academics like that, except that is the relevance of that, the technology transfer, that knowledge transfer, the commercialization of it is not built into most university systems. And so I think that the very systems have to be questioned, and there's way more to it than that, but that is a fundamental question that needs to be asked. So the metrics that need to be looked at now are the metrics of what does the future now need? And I was at another event 2 weeks ago, and in a room moderating, emceeing 22 panels. The only thing they could agree on was lifelong learning was important. which is a very, very good thing. But
Womp womp.
right. But what does that mean? Okay, whatever, that's great. But again, one of the previous speakers talked about Nutella. Very small group of people are going to stop eating Nutella because of their sugar. People don't do things for what is good for them. So a metric that I would advocate for, and something that could be piloted here in the UAE, is mandatory legally required lifelong learning. That is not a popular concept. Building some sort of, maybe blockchain-based competency monitoring for this, building nano and incremental credentialing that then becomes degrees in a more traditional model. But finding some way to break the system, and the reason I talked about research is the rankings, which drive universities, and yes, I do agree that our children need to be educated. I have a 3.5-year-old. I'm dying right now with this. But what should a university look like when she gets there? I think we could probably all agree, anyone who's got anybody under 5 is probably never going to learn how to drive. The world is going to look very, very different. And so the metrics that we need to focus on are, very much assessment, skills-based productivity metrics that are very different than the learning model that we have now.
Ole, I'm curious if you can talk about co-investment and opportunities you actually see here, bringing this to the Europe-UAE corridor that we're talking about today.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I think it's related to what you've been talking about, Solveig, because it's like for us, we are invested in businesses. Like I've told you before, it's like the algae business that grows microalgae in a clean room condition that would be extremely suitable to this market here as well. But of course, then you also need to ensure that you actually have the workforce that is kind of able and knowledgeable to operate this. And we have already been somewhat struggling to have that knowledge kind of in the German facility that is currently running, simply because it's something that is quite new. So we are also getting so many new products, so many new production methods and facilities that I think it's ever evolving. So it becomes difficult to say, look, this is exactly what you have to know in order to be successful in a workforce. And that's why I think it's important to kind of have this idea that you just talked about. But generally speaking, I mean, look, we have been in touch already here with regarding Ecomotion, our automated parking technology, simply because if you look at Abu Dhabi Ports, for example, Ports Group, they are shipping so many cars every year from Asia towards Europe and further that need to be handled. Well, we have solutions. We have with the algae company something that is really interesting. We are speaking to people about one of our investments, smarter sustainable materials, so a vegan and PVC-free leather alternative that can be used for different opportunities. So there are many opportunities for us to also expand or extend the business of our portfolio companies into the region here. And I think it's something that we have already understood is something that is valued, but it also needs to be supported by then setting up production facilities here, creating jobs here, kind of getting the businesses to become a small part of the UAE or Abu Dhabi story, so to speak, to become successful here as well. And it's not just saying, look, we have something and we want to sell it to you and please buy as much as possible. Yeah. But it's a bit like becoming part of the economy.
That's really interesting. And I think here the story is really shifting as, not just a place to come and fundraise, but it really needs to be an idea of kind of reciprocity and being willing to work together. So it's interesting that you're saying, you're seeing potential for manufacturing, logistics, production, and actual workforce development here. Yeah. Do you see what are your barriers to progress on that?
Well, look, we've had some very interesting discussions. I think it is something that needs a bit of time as well, to be honest, because at least from my experience, there also have been a lot of, let's say activities where the main objective was to come to the region, say we have the greatest idea, pull as much money out as possible and run away.
Very extractive.
But it's so and I think that is That has become quite clear to everyone that is involved here as well, which is why people might have become a bit more hesitant towards such ideas, and which is why I think then you need to build trust, you need to build relationships, and you need to really also come here and show that that's what I said, that you want to establish something here, and not only for a year or two, but for a longer term in order to be part of the development of the country.
Mm-hmm. I want to open it up. How are we for time? Okay. Okay, thank you. Perfect. Does anyone have any questions for Ole or Solveig?
Can I start with one?
Sure.
So, because I wanted to ask this the whole time, Solveig's perfect. So assuming nobody wakes up in the morning saying, today I'm going to destroy the planet, today I'm going to destroy society, how do we implement, how do we change the OS of a whole new generation of young people that grow up to be able to have trust in that value set from the get-go, the same way we probably were all born with a lot of creativity, and then kids of the 70s, 80s lost it because everyone told us, don't be creative, become a lawyer. How can we establish that mindset? How can we change that OS in society?
That's my favorite. That is a wonderful question, because there's two brilliant points embedded in that. And the first is what you described, and I made a note of it. Actually, I don't normally bring up the papers, but there were so many brilliant comments this morning. But what you described is the tyranny of baby steps. Nobody wakes up deciding to destroy the planet. The first time I heard that expression, it was at Wharton's 20 years ago, and the faculty was describing Enron. How old that was. But no one wakes up in the morning determined to bankrupt a company. They wake up in the morning needing to make their quarterly goals so they get their bonus, send their kid to college, do whatever it is they need to do, and they make small changes, small decisions that when you wake up a year later or 2 years later is a crisis. And that is how those things happen. Now, there is the flip side of that, which is the triumph of baby steps, which is none of these things happen overnight. Now, the first thing, and again, to quote, is we have to be the long game on here. The long game on impact was one of our panels said this morning. This is not a quick fix. This is something that we have to, especially again, from a learning education standpoint, this is a long game. This is not a quick ed tech, build and sell for the vast majority of this space. And so really remember that this is incremental. This is something that we have to do. Now, these incremental changes are very revolutionary in what they need to be. But the second piece, and I think the more important, is the fundamental piece that has to get built into, in my opinion, a completely different education model, K through workforce, which is the idea of psychological safety. And this is not a wellness conversation, this is a science-based fact. If you look at Project Aristotle on the Google campuses, they have empirically proven, Amy Edmonds from Harvard research, that psychological safety is fundamental. And the reason it's directly related to your question is it's the last thing kids have in education. We penalize them in testing. You have to be. We've had a remarkable number of creative people speak here today who have been courageous enough to try something new and different. Most of us weren't taught that way. Most of us weren't built that way. Again, we represent a very small part of the population. Most people are taught to answer the question the way the teacher wants it answered, learn the way they want it done, but be it the culture of a family, a town, a organization, a nation, psychological safety has to be highly, highly valued. If you want, the only other thing they agreed on besides lifelong learning was the need for creative critical thinking for the future of all of us in the age of AI. And creative critical thinking is not taught. It is, in fact, actively beaten out of students in most environments because the tests don't allow for creative critical thinking. Most of us probably grew up on multiple choice tests, memorization. And I'm a huge fan, don't get me wrong. Fundamental knowledge is critical, but pedagogy must change. And that is, to your point, of how are we going to build a generation that's going to save all of your investments.
Any other questions? Going.
I can't see much, but it doesn't look like it.
We've scared them.
Really, the idea of psychological safety was.
I know. I'm sorry.
So I guess really in closing, I always like to be forward-looking to close. So Ole, if you wouldn't mind to close us out, I mean, what is the invitation here for you today in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of what your relationship is going to be here in the Gulf? And for people sitting here, what is the invitation to them and how they might participate?
Well, look, we have experienced already in Germany and in Europe that private capital is as important to making the change towards investing in impact, investing in sustainability as institutional capital is. So for everyone that is here, I can just invite them to be part of that, basically to also through private capital, be it as small as a ticket as I don't know, 10,000 euros, but it can help drive the change, and it can help you also within your personal network to advocate for that change. So that is something I think that is extremely valuable. And for us as a business, I think it's just that we need to extend the connections that we already have. We need to create more of those, and we need to establish a couple of our portfolio companies here to be successful here, to have successful operations here, in order to be a part of the region and also to benefit from that.
Sounds good. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
you, Solveig.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you.